All right, so thank you all for joining us for this brief overview of one of our experiences here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison that came about because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our title is Questions of Fairness in Remote Testing of K-12 English Learners, Developments, Challenges, and Recommendations. Okay, let me see if it's going to obey. There it is. So very quick overview of the organization of our presentation. We're going to start with a brief description of our context, the K-12 context in the United States. Then we will go over briefly about the issue that we were faced with the pandemic and how it affected our test administrations. That will be followed up by the developments or the decision-making process that we put in place in order to try and decide how to address those issues. And finally, we will make some recommendations based on our experiences. And without further ado, I will pass it over to my colleague, Alicia.
Thank you, Fabiana. The study context is kindergarten to 12th grade public school system in the US. There are a number of US federal laws that indicate that English learners have certain rights to receive language support. For example, according to the Every Student Succeeds Act of 2015, English learners have equal opportunities for academic advancement as their counterparts, including receiving language support in schools. The federal law also requires English learners to take an annual ELP assessment, which is used for identifying and placing learners needing language support, monitoring their progress, and also reclassifying English learners when they become proficient. Next slide, please.
Hey, Alicia, I'm trying. It's not obeying. Oh, there it is.
Yeah. WIDA supports the federal government's efforts by serving English learners. At WIDA, we develop language assessments, language development standards, and we also offer professional learning opportunities for our language educators as well. And all of the work that we do is research and evidence-based. Because we serve culturally and linguistically diverse K-12 learners who may be marginalized in the society, one of our core mission is to promote equity and social justice among our learners. Next slide, please. And the two assessments that we will discuss today include WIDA Screener and Access for ELLs. The WIDA Screener, as the name suggests, is a screening test for K-12 students. It's administered on demand to identify English learners when they enter the US public school system. The test is available to all 41 US states and territories that are part of the WIDA consortium. And each year, approximately 100,000 students take the test. All 4 skills are tested on the test, and there's both an online and paper version of the test. And students take the test in person. Now moving on to the Access for ELLs test. This test is a summative test for K-12 students, and similar to the screener, it's administered to all ELs across the 41 consortium states and territories. And approximately 2 million students take the test each year. All 4 skills are tested either using the online or paper platform. Again, the test is administered in person. During the COVID pandemic, there have been challenges in administering these assessments to our test takers. So I'm going to pass it over to Jason, who will describe the challenges in more detail.
All right, thank you so much, Alicia. So, of course, at the core of this work is the COVID-19 pandemic. What we face, and I think what many parts of the world. With the onset of the pandemic, schools closed, and that led to a shift to remote learning here in the US. And because of this, in-person test administrations were not possible. But also our stakeholders throughout the consortium put in requests for at-home assessment options. So the US Department of Education required that states administer English language proficiency assessments to English learners in the 2020-2021 school year. We worked with our stakeholders through meetings and surveys to evaluate the possibility of developing remote testing options. You know, we were just trying to figure out, well, what could we offer the consortium? And we worked with our technical advisory committee, which is a group of experts and scholars outside of WIDA. We worked with our state education agency representatives. So these are leaders at the state level and the departments of eds, and our local education agency representatives as well. These are our school district leaders. And of course, all of this collaboration from the assessment team was done in partnership with the WIDA Executive Committee. So we identified 4 risk areas, and the first 2 were equity and validity. And I'll just read a couple of these concerns. So one of our primary concerns for equity, we were concerned about our English learner families having devices to test on. Could schools provide devices to families who did not have them at home? And of course, there were also questions around stable Wi-Fi or internet connections for reliable testing. With validity, we were concerned about the remote testing environment. Does it impact our ability to understand what students' scores mean? And what evidence do we collect to assure validity? Our third and fourth risk areas were technical issues and security. For technical issues, we were concerned about school districts supporting a local technology access and setup. How will they support troubleshooting students' technology challenges should they arise? And this was super important for the youngest of learners that take our assessments, and also those students with low English proficiency levels. And in terms of security, super important, you know, for us for these high stakes ELP assessments was protecting security of test items and test materials during remote administrations. And I believe I'll pass it to Fabiana.
Thank you, Jason. Yes, so when faced with these very thought-provoking issues, we went straight to our stakeholders and had meetings with them, those groups that Jason mentioned, our SCAs, our LEAs, the Technical Advisory Committee, educators, and we all together considered the test purpose of these 2 specific tests for which we received a request to come up with remote options. And together we also tried to evaluate if adjustments were possible, and even where they were possible, if they were acceptable given those 4 criteria that Jason mentioned. Of course, we looked at other criteria as well. We just chose to focus on these 4 in this specific presentation. So first, I would like to talk about our discussions regarding the WIDA screener, the first test that Alicia described, the one that we use to identify ELs. We considered, is test simplification possible when creating a version of a test that is typically administered in person, or even if online, but with proctors in a school environment, moving that to remote would necessitate making adjustments. Could those adjustments include simplifying the test itself, so to make it more amenable to a remote administration? And what we considered was perhaps reducing the number of domains tested. As Alicia mentioned, the original version of the test tests the 4 domains, but we considered perhaps reducing those domains to 2 or 3, depending on the grade cluster. And then we also considered perhaps simplifying the actual test results, where while the original test provides a proficiency level score, we considered perhaps instead of that, simply giving a binary determination as to whether the learner being tested was an English learner or not, or perhaps if there wasn't enough information to make that decision, to make that determination as well. And finally, we looked at the possibility of delivering the test in a way that was available to all of our end users, regardless of their social status or where they live. And we came to the conclusion that we could expect that they would have cell phones available to them. So we looked at the possibility of creating a version that could be administered via cell phones. Okay, let me see here. There it is. So looking at the 4 criteria that we were focusing on to make those decisions, and those questions that I just mentioned that we went through, we came to the conclusion that yes, we could uphold equity and validity by reducing the number of domains tested in this specific situation for this specific test purpose, and also adjusting the scores provided from a proficiency level score, reducing that to just a binary decision. Do we recommend that this learner receive additional instruction or not as an EL identified learner? So making that reduction, that simplification, we felt together that we would still be upholding equity and validity. And finally, the solution to use cell phones with a one-on-one administration with a test administrator. There's usually an educator giving the test to an individual learner over a cell phone, ideally with video, but if not, audio would still be possible to administer the test. We believed that that would still uphold the equity, validity, tech issues, and security criteria that were our focus. So we ended up with a test that was a temporary solution, and the results of which had offered just 3 possibilities: recommend the learner as an English learner, not recommend as an English learner, or not enough information. At WIDA, we strongly recommend that those learners that are tested via the remote screener, when possible, when returning to school, that result be corroborated by an in-person administration of the test. And we reduced the length of the test from 80 minutes to 10 minutes. And for K-1 learners, we reduced the number of domains from 4 to 2, and for the remaining learners from 4 to 3. Now, regarding the other tests, the Access for ELLs test, which we use for monitoring purposes and also for reclassification for those learners that were originally classified as English learners. When they become proficient and exit EL status, we do that by administering this summative test. So the same considerations we made for the screener test, we wondered if it would be available, would be possible to do that for this other test that is more detailed in purpose. So we asked ourselves, would reducing domains tested compromise validity in this specific case? And would any results other than a proficiency level suffice to measure progress? And we also asked ourselves, would devices that meet tech and security criteria be available to all? Could we trust that? And we, along with our stakeholders, came to the conclusion that that would not be possible for this specific test. Reducing the domains tested would violate validity and equity. there was no alternative to measure progress that other than providing proficiency level scores. And also there was not a device that we felt would be available to all that could accommodate the 4 domains in a manner that would make us trust the results of those tests. So we decided against creating a remote version of this test. And now I will pass it over to Alicia to talk a little bit about our recommendations and next steps.
Thank you, Fabiana. So I would like to conclude by sharing our recommendations when making decisions on remote assessments. So first, equity, fairness, and social justice must be central in the decision-making process. Second, validity, security, and technical soundness of any proposed solutions would be meaningless if equity is not met and upheld. Next slide, please. Lastly, while equity concerns are particularly important to the population that we serve at WIDA, so these are K-12 multilingual learners, these concerns surrounding equity should be central in other assessment contexts as well, including other ELP assessments and other content assessments as well.